Recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here and for your efforts to get here. Appreciate it very much. This is obviously very, very important to all of us. I want to start with you, Mr. Grant, and just ask you, if you can, and please dumb it down for me if you will, what are trust marks? Can you just explain that to me?
Trust mark, sure. Best example of a trust mark is the Visa logo that's on 2 credit cards in my wallet. So that if I go down to the cafeteria here afterwards and have lunch with Troy or Ed, the cafeteria doesn't really care which credit card I pay with. I got one issued by Capital One and one issued by Chase because it's got that Visa trust mark on it, which stands for a bunch of standards and operating rules that govern everything from how that card's authenticated at the point of sale terminal, what security is in place, how long it takes for my bank to pay the cafeteria, for my lunch, what transaction rate that they're actually going to pay in terms of the fee for processing that, and some would argue most importantly, if let's say Vice Chairman Griffith steals my credit card and buys lunch for the committee, and I can test that with my bank, what am I liable for and what's the merchant liable for? So the trust mark is essentially something that represents all of those standards and operating rules that in the credit card network everybody who's an issuing bank has to follow, and everybody else has to follow. In the identity space, one argument, this was a lot of the focus of NSTIC, is that we need to create something similar to the Visa network but for identity, which is that I could have the issuer be my state DMV or the Social Security Administration, my bank, my mobile network operator. It could be an advocacy group like the NRA or the ACLU or US PIRG, who all could validate my identity a certain way, issue me a credential that I could use everywhere, and the reason it would be trusted is because it has that trust mark.
Well, that's really where I'm getting at, because as I understand it, the Trusted Identities Group is actually farmed out, if you will, pilot projects, and the Georgia Tech Research Institute has actually come up with the emphasis on the machine-readable trust marks, and it's been very successful, and the results have been positive, particularly when it was over a trusted framework, and that would encourage greater trust. How can this be implemented in industry? How can we use this?
So I'm just a little bit of background on the GTRI pilot. That was one of the ones that I selected for funding when I was running the NSTIC program, and the idea was how can you do something for identity that's similar to what you see in financial services. I'd say, where it's gone as a pilot, it was a great, look, it's a pilot. It's a proof of concept, basically. It isn't something that's been picked up yet by industry. What I can say, though, is that work is being looked at by, I don't want to break confidentiality with anybody I'm, doing work with now, but some bigger players that matter in the ecosystem who are actually looking at taking that similar concept and actually developing a broader federated identity system that could be led by the private sector for making it easier for consumers to identify themselves. The idea would be to basically leverage work that's being done there already with, I can actually say it's in financial services, since banks know you, thanks to the Know Your Customer rules that they go through, and you might trust your bank. Not everybody does, but some might. How could they vouch for you other places when you're looking to open up a new account?
Right. But do you agree that this is kind of the route we ought to be going?
I think it's a big part of the solution. I don't know that trust marks are going to solve everything. Look, so we did some good things with NSTIC. One of the things we didn't do was solve all the problems. And it's because it's really complicated. And there's a whole bunch of, whether it's legal barriers, technical barriers, how do you create something that's really easy for consumers to use? There's issues that are out there. For as much as everybody loves to beat up on KBA and what the credit bureaus do, there's a reason it's been used so much in the market for years, which is that for many people it's worked.
Right.
If I'm applying for a new credit card, I can do something instantly. When I went to lease a new car for my wife a year ago, I was able to get quick credit. So I don't want to suggest we throw the baby out with the bathwater because there's problems. It's more realizing where attackers have caught up and how do we develop better solutions.
Okay. Mr. Hunt, any comments on trust marks and how it can be implemented into the private sector? And
I think I'd probably defer back to Mr. Grant as the expert on trust marks there.
Right. Well, any other new technologies that you find interesting and perhaps that has some potential?
I think ultimately we're going to see an augmentation of different practices. I mean, many people, for example, say, well, look, is the answer biometrics or is the answer physical tokens? And where we're getting to now is, I think, an acknowledgement that we can't rely on one single knowledge-based authentication attribute, for example. But we do have many other things available to us now that we didn't have, say, 2 decades ago. We have ubiquitous mobile devices with internet connectivity. We have SMS. We have other forms of identifiers like physical YubiKey tokens, for example. And I think the right strategy moving forward is going to be the right augmentation of those under the right scenarios, depending on the trust level that you need to establish.
Great. Thank you all again, and I yield back.